The client dinner ended 40 minutes early. And that was the only reason I was standing outside on NW Everett when I saw Marcus step out of a black Uber and pause just long enough to straighten his jacket before moving toward the restaurant entrance. He didn't look around. He moved the way a person moves towards something familiar. Without checking. Without slowing. The way you move when you already know exactly where you're going and you stopped worrying about being seen a long time ago. I had my phone in my hand. My rideshare 3 minutes out. And I was thinking about nothing except getting home and taking off my heels. She came from the direction of the parking structure on the same block. Same moment. And she didn't hesitate when she reached him. No embrace. No greeting that would look like anything to a stranger passing by. No pause that needed explaining. Marcus placed his hand on her lower back as he held the door open, and they walked inside together in one motion. Easy. Wordless. Automatic. It was a half-second gesture. The kind that doesn't ask permission because it stopped needing to a long time ago. The kind that only exists between two people who have done this before. My rideshare pulled up to the curb, and I got in without thinking about it. Gave the driver my address. And sat with my phone face down on my lap the entire ride home. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't text. I watched the city move past the window and let the silence in the car settle into something I wasn't ready to name. Something that sat low and still in my chest, the way certainty does when it has nowhere left to go. Marcus came home at 11, leaned in the bedroom doorway, and said client dinner ran long. The same 4 words he had used twice already in the past 3 weeks. I said okay and turned a page I hadn't been reading for the last hour. And he went to brush his teeth and came to bed and was asleep in minutes. I lay there listening to him breathe and stared at the ceiling until the room felt smaller than it ever had before. The next morning, after he left, I opened the banking app and started looking the way I always look at work. Not for something obvious, but for pattern, for repetition, for the detail that hides inside ordinary data because nobody thought to question it. 4 charges at the Nines Hotel downtown. Spaced across 10 weeks, every single one landing on a Tuesday or a Thursday. A transfer of $14,000 to an entity called WFP Holdings LLC. A name I had never once heard Marcus mention in 7 years of marriage. Not once over dinner. Not once in passing. Not once at all. I set the phone down and sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold in front of me. And I thought about a text Rita had sent me 6 weeks earlier. A message I had read once and closed without letting myself sit with it. She had seen Marcus at the Wyden Industry Mixer and said he wasn't alone. That she wanted to mention it just in case it meant something. I had written back that he goes to those for work. And I had put my phone down and moved on with my afternoon as if the message had never arrived. I opened it again now, read every word of it again, and then set my phone face down on the table, the same way Marcus always sets his, and understood for the first time exactly what that habit means. I had the information. I just hadn't wanted it to mean anything at all. I opened the Oregon Secretary of State Business Registry on my laptop that same morning. Still at the kitchen table. Still in the clothes I had slept in. The coffee cup empty now, and the house quiet in the way it only gets, when you realize you are completely alone in it. The registry is public. Anyone can use it. And I typed WFP Holdings LLC into the search field, the same way I would type anything into a search field at work. Without expectation. Just looking for what the data would return. The result loaded in under 3 seconds. Registered agent, Marcus West. Formation date, 5 months ago. And then a second name under member. A name I had never heard Marcus say out loud in 7 years, Danielle Ford. I read the filing twice. Slowly. The way you read something when part of your brain is still trying to find the alternative explanation. Still trying to locate the version where this makes sense in a different way. There wasn't one. Marcus had opened a business entity 5 months ago. Put his name on it, put her name on it, and transferred $14,000 of our joint money into it without once mentioning any of it to me. I opened a new tab and typed her name into LinkedIn before I had finished processing what I had just read. Danielle Ford, Portland, Oregon. Mortgage loan officer at Pacific Ridge Lending. The same Pacific Ridge Lending that Marcus had worked with to close 3 commercial deals in the past year. A firm he had mentioned by name at our dinner table more than once. A firm I had never thought twice about, because why would I? Her profile photo loaded and I sat very still looking at it. Because it was the same woman I had watched walk through that restaurant door on NW Everett the night before. Composed, deliberate. Moving toward my husband like she already knew exactly where he would be. This was not just an affair. Her name was on a legal document alongside his, and her employer was the same firm that processed his deals. Which meant the $14,000 that had moved out of our joint account had not gone toward anything random. It had gone toward something structured. Something that required her signature and her professional access and a filing date 5 months in the past. I opened a new document on my laptop and started a column of notes. Date. Amount. Entity. Source. And I worked through everything I had found without stopping. Without getting up. Without letting myself feel anything beyond the specific and clarifying weight of understanding exactly what I was looking at. I had spent 7 years building a life with a man who had apparently spent the last 5 months building an exit with someone else. And the only reason I was sitting here now with her name on my screen was that a client dinner ended 40 minutes early on a Tuesday night in November. That was the margin. 40 minutes. And he had not been careful enough to account for it. I emailed Paula Strickland that same afternoon. 2 sentences. Nothing emotional. I need a consultation regarding potential fraudulent transfer of marital assets. And I am available at your earliest convenience. Paula was a family law attorney on SW Broadway whose name I had seen on a colleague's paperwork 2 years ago. Someone I had filed away in the back of my mind, without knowing why. The way you sometimes hold on to information before you understand what it's for. She replied in 40 minutes with a time slot the next morning, and I accepted it without hesitation and went back to my notes. Her office was quiet in the way that offices are when the people inside them have learned that most problems are solved by precision rather than urgency. Paula greeted me at the door, led me to a chair across from her desk, and waited. I didn't give her the emotional version. I gave her the documented version, the LLC, the formation date, the $14,000 transfer, Danielle Ford's name on the filing, her position at Pacific Ridge Lending, the hotel charges across 10 weeks, the timeline. Paula listened without interrupting, her pen moving occasionally across a legal pad, her expression focused and entirely unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and told me that Oregon is an equitable distribution state, which I already knew in a general way, but that if Marcus had transferred marital assets into that LLC prior to filing for dissolution, that constituted fraudulent conveyance under ORS 95.2, and the court could move to freeze joint assets while the case was pending. I asked how fast, and she said fast enough that he won't have time to move anything else. Then she told me the most important thing she would say in that entire meeting. Do not confront him. Do not change your behavior at home. Do not let him know you are looking. She was already reaching for her phone to call Greg Santos before I had finished nodding. Greg was a CPA who did forensic accounting work, which meant his job was to find money that someone had tried to make unfindable. And he was apparently very good at it. A week later, Paula called me into her office to go over his report, and I sat across from her desk again and read through numbers that were worse than I had calculated on my own. WFP Holdings LLC had been used to receive commission income redirected from 3 commercial deals. Money that should have flowed into our joint account, but had instead been routed through the LLC and kept separate. The total across 8 months was $47,000. Danielle Ford had signed 2 of the LLC documents as a member, and in her capacity as a loan officer at Pacific Ridge Lending, she had processed one of the 3 deals that generated the diverted income, which meant her involvement was not incidental and not passive. Paula set the report on the desk between us and said the Oregon Division of Financial Regulation would have significant interest in that particular detail, and that Greg's findings gave us more than enough to proceed. I asked if it was enough, and Paula looked at me steadily and said there is more here than you need. The 10 days between my meeting with Paula and the filing date were the strangest 10 days of my life. Not because anything dramatic happened inside them, but because nothing did. I cooked dinner on the nights Marcus was home. I asked how his day went and listened to the answer, and refilled my glass of water and moved through every ordinary motion of a shared life with the kind of steadiness that surprised even me. Greg Santos was working. Paula was preparing the filing. All I had to do was hold the surface still for a little while longer. And I was good at holding surfaces still. Marcus didn't change anything about his behavior, which told me everything I needed to know about how safe he felt. He still came home late on Tuesdays and Thursdays with the same explanations wearing slightly different words. Still set his phone face down on the kitchen counter the moment he walked in. Still kissed me on the cheek in the mornings before reaching for his keys. The routine was identical to the one we had maintained for years, and he moved through it without friction, without guilt that I could see, without any sign that he understood. The ground had already shifted under both of us. One evening he set his phone on the dinner table between us, and it lit up while he was reaching for the bread. And I caught the notification before he flipped it over. D. F. 8:17 p.m. On a Wednesday. He turned the screen down in one smooth motion and kept talking about a zoning issue with a client in Lake Oswego, his voice unhurried, his eyes on his plate. I picked up my fork and asked a question about the zoning issue, and he answered it. And we finished dinner, and I cleared the table, and neither of us said anything that mattered. D. F. was Danielle Ford, sending a message at 8:17 on a Wednesday evening to a man sitting across the dinner table from his wife, and he hadn't even hesitated. That was the part that stayed with me after I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. Not the notification itself, but the ease of it. The complete and practiced ease of a person who had long since stopped worrying about being caught because he had decided, somewhere along the way, that I simply was not paying attention. Paula filed the petition for dissolution of marriage at Multnomah County Circuit Court on a Thursday morning, with a motion to freeze joint assets, citing ORS 95.2, fraudulent conveyance filed at the same time. Greg submitted his complaint to the Oregon Division of Financial Regulation regarding Danielle Ford separately, as its own independent process, because that was how Paula had structured it from the beginning. Marcus was served at his office, not at home, not in the evening. In the middle of a workday with his receptionist at the front desk and two colleagues in the hallway, I was in a user research session when it happened, sitting behind a one-way mirror with a legal pad on my lap, watching a participant navigate a new interface while I took notes. My phone started vibrating around 11:15, and I turned the screen just far enough to see Marcus's name, then set it back down and kept writing. He called 4 times in 40 minutes. I let all 4 go. He came home at 3 in the afternoon, which was answer enough on its own, because Marcus did not leave work mid-Thursday for any reason I had seen in 7 years. His footsteps moved through the house fast when he came in, and when he appeared in the kitchen doorway, he had the papers in his hand, and his face had lost whatever composure he had held onto during the drive over. I was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, and I did not stand up. "What did you do?" he said, and I told him I documented what you did, and the distinction landed exactly the way I intended. He moved through the explanation then. The LLC was to protect assets. Danielle was a business partner. Everything had a version if I would let him give it. I waited until he ran out of momentum and said, "Marcus, Paula has Greg's report. The court has the filing. The DFR has Danielle's complaint. There is nothing left to explain." He shifted then, voice going quieter, and said, "We can fix this. We have 7 years?" I looked at him long enough that the silence had weight before I answered. 7 years is exactly why I didn't guess. I looked, and I found everything. I stood up, carried my cup to the sink, and set it down. "You should call your attorney," I said, and walked out of the kitchen and left him standing there with the papers still in his hand. The Multnomah County Circuit Court froze joint assets within days of the filing, which meant Marcus could not move money out of anything we held together while the case was pending. WFP Holdings LLC was dissolved by court order during discovery. And because Greg's report documented fraudulent conveyance clearly enough that there was no credible counter-argument, Marcus was required to cover my legal fees in addition to his own. The $2.3 million commercial deal he had been negotiating for 3 months collapsed when his prospective partner pulled out after the filing became part of the public record. Because in commercial real estate, your name attached to a fraud complaint is not something a serious partner overlooks. Derek Poole was subpoenaed during discovery and testified that he had known about the LLC and about Danielle for 6 months, which confirmed the timeline Greg had already established on paper. Danielle Ford's mortgage license was suspended by the Oregon Division of Financial Regulation, pending investigation into her role in the LLC and her processing of the deal that generated diverted income while she held a membership interest in the receiving entity. Pacific Ridge Lending terminated her contract the same week the suspension was issued, and whatever future she and Marcus had built their plan around did not survive the pressure of each of them needing a separate attorney and a separate defense. The plan had required them to be on the same side, and the law had efficiently removed that option. Derek lost 3 clients in the 2 months that followed, not because of anything legal, but because commercial real estate in Portland is a smaller world than it looks from the outside. And people in that world had read the public filing and drawn their own conclusions about a man who knew and said nothing. Rita called me the evening the divorce was finalized, and I answered on the second ring. And we didn't talk about Marcus at all. We made plans to have coffee at Coava that weekend and talked about a trip I had been thinking about taking. Somewhere I had always postponed without a reason I could clearly name. The divorce was finalized 4 months after Paula filed. Faster than the average, because there was nothing left to dispute once the assets were fully traced, and the court had Greg's report in hand. I didn't leave Portland. I found an apartment in the Hawthorne neighborhood, close enough to the Willamette that I could hear the city differently in the mornings. And I signed the lease on my own and carried my own boxes up the stairs and stood in the empty living room on the first evening and felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could precisely measure. One morning a few weeks later, I opened my laptop and saw Marcus's name attached to a property listing, a smaller deal than anything he had worked on when we were together. And I registered it the way you register a street name you no longer live on. I closed the tab. Not because it hurt, and not because it didn't, but because it had simply stopped being relevant to anything I was building. And I had a research session in 40 minutes, and I had notes to review before it started.